Jack Morrison hadn't slept properly since 1968. Every night at 3:20 in the morning he woke up with the same nightmare. In the dream he was a 20-year-old sniper in Vietnam again. In the dream he pulled the trigger again. Today the storm came early. December wind howled through Montana's pine forests like ghosts from the past. Jack stood by his cabin window and watched the white curtain of snow. After 40 years of solitude he had learned to read weather better than any forecast. This storm would be fierce. This storm would last 3 days. Jack's cabin stood 15 miles from the nearest neighbor. The electricity had been out for 2 days already. Phone service disappeared yesterday evening. But Jack wasn't scared. Solitude was his best friend and worst enemy at the same time. He lit the fireplace and put coffee on the wood stove. His hands trembled not from cold. At 72 years old Jack still felt the rifle's recoil in his shoulder. Still heard the voices of those he killed. Still counted them every night. 243. That was the number recorded in his official report. The real number was higher. Much higher. Coffee boiled and Jack poured himself a cup. He hadn't added sugar for 50 years. Bitterness reminded him of what he deserved. Of losing his right to sweetness in life. The storm intensified. Wind hit the windows with such force it seemed like someone knocking and asking to be let in. Jack knew this feeling. For decades the dead had knocked on the doors of his consciousness every night. He walked to the old dresser and pulled out a photograph. It showed a girl with long blonde hair and blue eyes. Sarah Thompson. They were supposed to marry in the spring of '70. But Jack came back from war broken. Sarah deserved better. Everyone deserved better than him. Outside the window something cracked. Jack instantly tensed and listened. 40 years of civilian life hadn't diminished his reflexes. Every sound was still a potential threat. Every shadow could still hide an enemy. The crack repeated. This time closer to the cabin. Jack put on his thick jacket and boots. He opened the door and stepped into the storm. Snow hit his face like small buckshot. He walked around the cabin checking the firewood and generator. Everything was in order. Maybe it was just a fallen tree. He was already returning to the cabin when he heard a new sound. Quiet, barely audible among the winds howling. Whimpering. Or moaning. Something alive and suffering. Jack stopped. His heart beat faster. During all years of solitude he had learned to ignore others' pain. It was the only way to survive with what he had done in the war. But this sound was different. This sound cut through his defenses like a knife. He followed the sound. Step by step through deep snow. The sound became louder. More desperate. 50 yards from the cabin, near an old pine tree, he saw her. A she-wolf lay in the snow. Her left hind paw was trapped in a metal snare. Steel had cut into muscle and bone. Around the trap snow was red with blood. The animal looked at Jack with yellow eyes filled with pain and fear. Poachers. Jack knew these traps. Illegal, cruel, deadly. The she-wolf tried to crawl away but the trap held tight. She whimpered from pain. The sound tore Jack's heart to pieces. In 40 years this was the first cry he couldn't ignore. He slowly approached closer. The she-wolf bared her teeth, preparing for the last battle. Jack stopped a few feet from her. In her eyes he saw something familiar. Something that looked at him from the mirror every night. Despair. Pain. And readiness to die. "I won't hurt you," Jack whispered through the storm's howling. His voice trembled. "I've caused enough pain for one lifetime." The she-wolf quieted down. As if she understood his words. Or sensed something in his voice. Something that said, "This man knows what suffering means." Jack looked at his hands. These hands had killed. These hands had taken lives with professional precision. These hands had never saved anyone. But today, in the middle of the worst storm in 20 years, they could try. For the first time in 40 years, Jack Morrison had a chance to save someone. The storm howled around them as if nature itself was testing his decision. Jack took a step forward. Toward the she-wolf. Toward his chance at redemption. The metal trap gleamed through the snow like a cruel reminder of human cruelty. Jack had seen enough traps in Vietnam. Bamboo spikes, trip wires, mines hidden in rice paddies. But this was different. This trap wasn't meant to kill enemies. It was meant to kill innocents. The she-wolf's breathing was shallow and rapid. Shock was setting in. If he didn't act soon, she would die from blood loss and exposure. Jack knelt in the snow 3 feet away from her. His old knees protested against the cold ground. "Easy girl," he whispered. "I know you're scared. I've been scared for 40 years." The wind carried his words away, but somehow the wolf seemed to hear them. Her yellow eyes fixed on his face. In those eyes Jack saw no hatred, only pain and a desperate will to live. Slowly, very slowly, Jack reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his old military knife. The blade that had taken so many lives. Today it would serve a different purpose. The she-wolf tensed when she saw the knife. Her lips pulled back in a silent snarl. But she was too weak to fight. Too weak to run. All she could do was wait and see if this strange human would end her suffering or prolong it. Jack's hands stopped shaking. For the first time in decades his fingers were steady. This felt familiar yet completely foreign. The precision, the focus, the life and death moment. But this time he was fighting death, not delivering it. Jack approached the trap with the same caution he once used in enemy territory. Every movement was calculated. Every breath controlled. The she-wolf watched him with eyes that held both terror and desperate hope. The metal jaws had crushed her leg just above the paw. Blood had frozen into dark crystals around the wound. Jack could see bone fragments through torn flesh. In Vietnam he had seen worse. Much worse. But those were enemy soldiers. This was an innocent creature caught by human cruelty. "I'm going to touch the trap now," he whispered to the wolf. "Don't bite me. I'm trying to help." His fingers found the release mechanism. The spring was powerful, designed to hold struggling animals until they died from exhaustion or exposure. Jack's arthritis screamed as he applied pressure. The mechanism wouldn't budge. Suddenly he was back in the jungle. Dak 2, November 1967. His spotter Tommy Williams had stepped on a punji stick trap. The bamboo spike had gone through his boot and into his foot. Tommy had screamed for his mother as Jack tried to pull him free. Tommy died 3 hours later from infection. Jack never called for a medic. Never tried to save him. He just watched his friend die and continued the mission. "Not this time," Jack muttered through gritted teeth. "Not this time." He repositioned his grip and pulled harder. The wolf whimpered as the trap shifted slightly. Jack's hands were going numb from cold, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. This was his chance to balance the scales. The mechanism clicked. The jaws opened half an inch. Enough for him to get better leverage. Jack wedged his knife between the metal teeth and used it as a pry bar. The blade bent but held. "Come on, you bastard," he growled at the trap. "Let her go." Another click. The jaws opened wider. The she-wolf's leg slipped free with a wet sound that made Jack's stomach turn. She immediately tried to stand but collapsed back into the snow. The leg was badly damaged. Jack quickly examined the wound. The trap had crushed muscle and chipped bone but hadn't severed any major arteries. She would live if he could get her warm and stop the bleeding. But first he had to get her to trust him enough to let him carry her. The she-wolf tried to crawl away from Jack, dragging her injured leg through the snow. Each movement left a trail of fresh blood. She made it maybe 3 feet before exhaustion forced her to stop. "Easy girl," Jack said softly. "You're hurt bad. You won't make it in this storm." She turned to face him, lips pulled back in a weak snarl. But there was no real fight left in her. Jack had seen that look before. In the eyes of wounded soldiers who knew they were dying. In the eyes of villagers caught in crossfire. In his own reflection every morning for 40 years. Jack slowly removed his heavy winter coat. The cold bit into his skin immediately, but he ignored it. He needed the coat as a makeshift stretcher. And maybe as a peace offering. "I know you don't trust me," he said as he laid the coat on the snow. "Hell, I don't trust me either. But we're both going to die out here if we don't work together." The wind picked up, driving snow horizontally across the clearing. Visibility dropped to maybe 10 feet. Jack could barely see his cabin through the white wall. The temperature was falling fast. 20 below, maybe colder. He thought about Sarah again. How she used to rescue injured birds when they were teenagers. She had gentle hands and infinite patience. She would sing to the frightened creatures while she bandaged their broken wings. Jack's hands weren't gentle. They were killer's hands, stained with blood that no amount of years could wash clean. But maybe, just maybe, they could learn to heal instead of hurt. He reached toward the she-wolf slowly, telegraphing every movement. "I'm going to pick you up now. Don't bite me and I won't drop you." The wolf's muscles tensed as his hands slid under her body. She was heavier than he expected, maybe 80 pounds of muscle and bone and matted fur. Her body heat felt like fire against his frozen fingers. For a moment she struggled weakly, trying to escape his grip. Then she went limp. Either from exhaustion or resignation. Jack lifted her carefully onto the coat and wrapped it around her like a cocoon. "There we go," he murmured. Just like Tommy should have been carried. The memory hit him like a physical blow. Tommy Williams, 19 years old, blonde hair and freckles, 2 weeks away from going home. Jack had left his body in the jungle and never looked back. Never even wrote to his mother. But this time would be different. This time he would carry the wounded to safety. This time he would save a life instead of taking one. Jack lifted the bundled wolf and started toward his cabin. Each step was a battle against the wind and his own guilty conscience. But he kept walking, carrying his chance at redemption through the Montana blizzard. Jack kicked open his cabin door and stumbled inside with the wounded she-wolf. The warmth hit his face like a slap after the brutal cold. His lungs burned as he gasped for air. The wolf's weight had nearly broken him during the final push through the drifts. He laid her gently on the rug in front of the fireplace. Blood immediately soaked into the old wool fabric. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. Shock was setting in fast. Jack had seen enough dying to recognize the signs. "Stay with me," he whispered, unwrapping her from his coat. "Don't you dare give up now." The injured leg was worse than he thought. The trap's teeth had crushed the bone in 2 places. Muscle hung in shreds. If this were a soldier in Vietnam, Jack would have called for an immediate medevac. But this was Montana in a blizzard. There was no help coming. Jack went to his bathroom and gathered supplies. Gauze, antiseptic, medical tape from his old first aid kit. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. The same hands that had field-dressed wounds in rice paddies and jungle clearings. The same hands that had ended lives with a rifle. When he returned, the she-wolf was trying to stand. She collapsed immediately, whimpering in pain. Jack knelt beside her and gently pushed her back down. "I know it hurts," he said. "But you need to stay still." He cleaned the wound as best he could. The wolf flinched but didn't snap at him. Too weak to fight. Too tired to care. Jack wrapped her leg in clean gauze and secured it with tape. It wasn't pretty, but it would stop the bleeding. As he worked, Jack noticed something that made his heart skip. The she-wolf's belly was swollen and moving. She wasn't just injured. She was heavily pregnant. "Jesus Christ," Jack breathed. "You're going to have pups." The realization hit him like artillery fire. This wasn't just about saving one life anymore. There were unborn cubs depending on him. Innocent lives that hadn't asked to be brought into this frozen hell. The she-wolf's eyes met his. In them he saw a desperate plea. Not just for herself but for her babies. Jack had never been a father. Never had the chance to protect anything innocent. But now, in his isolated cabin with death howling outside, he had the responsibility thrust upon him. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted to the wolf. "I only know how to break things. How to kill things." But even as he spoke, Jack's military training kicked in. Assess the situation. Identify resources. Develop a plan. Execute the mission. The mission now was to keep this wolf and her unborn cubs alive. Jack made a bed for the wolf near the fireplace using every blanket and pillow he owned. The warmth would help fight shock and hypothermia. He melted snow for fresh water and tried to coax her to drink. She lapped weakly at the bowl but couldn't keep much down. Hours passed. The storm outside grew worse, if that was possible. Wind shook the cabin like an angry giant. Snow piled against the windows until Jack could barely see daylight. They were completely cut off from the world. Around midnight, the she-wolf began to pant heavily. Her sides heaved with contractions. Labor was starting. Jack had never assisted with any kind of birth, human or animal. But he'd read about it in survival manuals. Clear the airway. Keep the mother warm. Let nature take its course. "Okay, girl," Jack said, settling beside her. "Looks like tonight's the night." The first contraction was weak. The wolf whined and shifted restlessly. Jack stroked her head gently, surprised by how soft her fur felt under his calloused fingers. He'd forgotten what it was like to touch something that wasn't hard or cold or dead. "You're going to be a good mother," he told her. "I can see it in your eyes. You've got that protective instinct. That's something I never had." The contractions grew stronger. The wolf's breathing became labored. Jack checked her pulse, fast but steady. He tried to remember everything he'd learned about emergency births. Keep her calm. Monitor for complications. Be ready to help if needed. But as the night wore on, Jack realized this wasn't going according to plan. The contractions were getting weaker instead of stronger. The she-wolf was exhausted from blood loss and trauma. She was fighting a losing battle on two fronts, her injury and the birth. "Come on," Jack urged. "Don't give up now. Your babies need you." The words echoed in his mind. How many babies had needed their fathers in Vietnam? How many children had he orphaned with his rifle? How many families had he destroyed with precise shots from hidden positions? Tommy Williams had a baby girl back home. Jack had seen the photo, all pink cheeks and curly hair. She would have grown up without a father because Jack hadn't tried to save Tommy. Hadn't even tried. But this time was different. This time he would fight death instead of delivering it. This time he would bring life into the world instead of taking it away. Jack placed his hands on the wolf's swollen belly. He could feel movement inside. Strong kicks from healthy cubs eager to be born. They were counting on him. Trusting him. Believing that this broken old soldier could somehow become their protector. "I won't let you down," he whispered. "Not this time." At 3:20 in the morning, the exact time Jack usually woke from his nightmares, the she-wolf gave a powerful push and the first cub emerged. Tiny, wet, and perfect. Jack's hands trembled as he cleared the membrane from its nose and mouth. The cub took its first breath and squeaked weakly. "There's one," Jack said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Come on, Mama. Give me another." 10 minutes later, a second cub arrived. Then a third. Each birth easier than the last as the she-wolf found her rhythm. Jack helped clean each tiny body and guided them to their mother's warmth. 3 perfect wolf cubs, dark gray with closed eyes and hungry mouths. The she-wolf began licking her babies immediately. Her maternal instincts overrode pain and exhaustion. She nuzzled each cub, encouraging them to nurse. Jack watched in amazement as life asserted itself over death, as love conquered fear. For the first time in 40 years, Jack Morrison cried. Tears ran down his weathered cheeks as he watched the new family bond. He thought about Tommy Williams and all the other young men who never got to see their children born. He thought about the Vietnamese mothers and fathers he'd orphaned. He thought about the life he could have had with Sarah if he hadn't come back from war so broken. But mostly he thought about redemption. About second chances. About the possibility that even a killer's hands could help bring life into the world. Outside, the storm began to weaken. The wind's howl softened to a whisper. Dawn was still hours away, but Jack could sense the change. The worst was over. They had survived the night. The she-wolf looked up at him with exhausted but grateful eyes. In them Jack saw something he hadn't seen in 4 decades, forgiveness. Not just from her, but somehow from all the ghosts that haunted his nights. "You did good, Mama," Jack said softly. "Real good." He sat back against the wall and watched the cubs nurse. Their tiny paws kneaded against their mother's belly. Their squeaks of satisfaction filled the cabin with a sound Jack had never heard before, the sound of pure innocence. For the first time since Vietnam, Jack Morrison fell asleep without nightmares. Instead he dreamed of spring, when the cubs would be old enough to explore the world beyond his cabin. He dreamed of teaching them to hunt and survive. He dreamed of being useful again. He dreamed of being more than just a killer. He dreamed of being a protector. Jack woke to sunlight streaming through frost-covered windows. For the first time in 40 years he had slept past dawn. No nightmares. No cold sweats. No screaming voices from the jungle. Just peaceful sleep and dreams of spring. The she-wolf lay curled around her 3 cubs near the dying fireplace. Her breathing was steady and strong. The cubs nursed contentedly, their tiny bodies warm against their mother's belly. The sight filled Jack with something he barely recognized, hope. He stood slowly, his old joints protesting after sleeping against the wall. But the pain felt different today. Not like the constant ache of guilt and regret. More like the honest soreness of work well done. Jack rebuilt the fire and put coffee on to boil. Outside, the storm had passed completely. Montana stretched endlessly white and pristine under the morning sun. Snow covered everything like a clean sheet, hiding all the ugly scars underneath. The she-wolf opened her yellow eyes and watched Jack move around the cabin. There was no fear in her gaze anymore. No suspicion. Just calm acceptance. She seemed to understand that this strange human meant no harm to her or her babies. "Good morning, Mama," Jack said softly. "How are the little ones?" The cubs were perfect. 2 males and 1 female, all healthy and strong. They had their mother's dark gray fur and compact bodies built for survival. In a few weeks their eyes would open. In a few months they would be ready to explore the world. But what world would that be? Jack's isolated cabin? The wild Montana mountains? Or somewhere in between? Jack had never faced this kind of decision before. In Vietnam, decisions were simple. Kill or be killed. Follow orders or face court-martial. There was no gray area, no room for doubt. But this was different. These cubs hadn't asked to be born in his cabin. Their mother hadn't chosen to trust him. Circumstances had forced them all together, 3 broken creatures taking shelter from the storm. Now the storm was over. What came next? Jack poured his coffee and sat at the kitchen table. He had enough supplies to last the winter. Enough food to keep the wolf family healthy until spring. But then what? Release them back into the wild where poachers set illegal traps? Keep them as pets in a world they weren't meant for? There were no easy answers. Maybe that was the point. Maybe life wasn't supposed to have easy answers, especially for someone who had taken so many lives that should have had long, complicated futures. Jack spent the morning making the cabin more suitable for his unexpected guests. He moved furniture to give the wolf family more space. He reinforced the area around the fireplace to keep the cubs safe when they started moving around. He even built a small barrier to prevent them from wandering too close to the fire. The work felt good. Purposeful. For decades Jack had maintained his cabin with military precision but no real enthusiasm. It was just something to keep his hands busy and his mind from wandering to dark places. But this was different. This was building something for others, not just himself. The she-wolf watched his preparations with intelligent eyes. She seemed to approve of his efforts. When Jack came too close to her cubs, she would tense slightly but didn't growl or snap. She was learning to trust him, just as he was learning to trust himself. Around noon, Jack heard a sound that made his blood freeze. The distant rumble of a snowmobile engine. Someone was coming up the mountain road. In 40 years of solitude, Jack had maybe a dozen unexpected visitors. Usually hunters who had gotten lost or park rangers checking on him after bad storms. But today was different. Today he had illegal wolves in his cabin. Endangered species that someone might want to report to authorities. Or worse, poachers looking for the wolf they had trapped. Jack grabbed his old hunting rifle from the gun cabinet. His hands were steady as he checked the action and loaded 5 rounds. Some instincts never died. Some skills were burned too deep to forget. The engine sound grew closer. Jack could see a single snowmobile threading through the trees below his cabin. One rider, bundled in winter gear. Moving slowly, carefully. Not like someone who knew where they were going. Jack opened the cabin door and stepped onto his porch. The cold air hit his lungs like ice water, but he ignored it. The rider saw him and changed direction, heading straight for the cabin. As the snowmobile got closer, Jack could see it was a young man. Maybe 30 years old with a thick beard and expensive gear. Not a park ranger. Not a local hunter. Someone from outside, someone who didn't belong on Jack's mountain. The man stopped his machine 20 yards from the porch and pulled off his helmet. He had city-soft features and nervous eyes. The kind of person who thought money could buy respect in places where it meant nothing. "You Jack Morrison?" the man called out. Jack nodded but didn't lower his rifle. "Who's asking?" "My name is Derek Powell. I work for a development company in Billings. We're interested in purchasing your property." Jack almost laughed. After 40 years of isolation, some city developer wanted to buy his mountain. Today of all days, when he had finally found something worth protecting. The irony was so sharp it cut. "Not for sale," Jack said simply. Derek Powell climbed off his snowmobile and started walking toward the cabin. He stopped when Jack raised the rifle higher. "Mr. Morrison, you haven't heard my offer yet. We're prepared to pay well above market value. You could retire somewhere warm and comfortable." I said not for sale. Derek's eyes shifted nervously. He was clearly uncomfortable being held at gunpoint by an old mountain man. But he pressed on, probably because his bosses had promised him a big commission. "Sir, we know you live alone up here. No family, no close neighbors. This land could be developed into something beautiful. A resort where families could come and enjoy nature." Behind Jack, one of the cubs made a small squeaking sound. Derek's head turned toward the noise, his eyes sharpening with curiosity. "What was that?" Derek asked. "None of your business. Mr. Morrison, if you're harboring illegal wildlife, that could complicate things. The state takes violations very seriously. But we might be able to work something out, help you relocate both yourself and any pets you might have." The threat was clear. Buy us out or we'll cause problems with wildlife officials. Jack had seen this kind of corporate bullying before. Rich men who thought they could push around anyone who stood in their way. But Derek Powell had made a crucial mistake. He had threatened Jack's wolves. "You need to leave," Jack said, his voice dropping to the same cold tone he had used in Vietnam before taking a shot. "Now." Derek must have heard something deadly in Jack's voice because he backed toward his snowmobile. But he wasn't giving up completely. "I'll be back, Mr. Morrison. With a better offer and proper authorities if necessary. This mountain would be perfect for development. Great views, good access to the valley. People would pay thousands to stay here." As Derek started his engine and drove away, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. The fierce protective instinct of a father defending his family. These wolves had become his responsibility. This mountain had become their sanctuary. For the first time since Vietnam, Jack Morrison had something worth fighting for. And unlike in the jungle, this time he would be fighting for life instead of death. Fighting to protect instead of destroy. He went back inside where the she-wolf was nursing her cubs. She looked up at him with trusting eyes, unaware of the threat that had just passed by their door. "Don't worry, Mama," Jack said softly. "Nobody's going to hurt your babies. Not while I'm alive." 3 weeks passed in peaceful routine. The cubs grew stronger each day, their eyes opening to reveal bright amber irises like their mothers. They stumbled around the cabin on unsteady legs, exploring every corner with fearless curiosity. The she-wolf's injured leg healed slowly but surely under Jack's careful attention. Jack had never known such contentment. He woke each morning to the sound of cubs playing instead of screaming nightmares. He spent his days chopping wood, melting snow for water, and watching his unlikely family grow. For the first time in 40 years, he looked forward to tomorrow. But peace never lasted long in Jack Morrison's life. On a crystal-clear Tuesday morning, he heard the sound that shattered his newfound happiness. Multiple engines roaring up the mountain road. Snowmobiles and maybe a four-wheel-drive vehicle struggling through the drifts. Too many people, moving too fast. Jack grabbed his binoculars and stepped onto the porch. Through the trees he counted 6 snowmobiles and 1 large truck with Montana fish, wildlife, and parks markings. Derek Powell had made good on his threat. "Son of a bitch," Jack muttered. Inside the cabin, the she-wolf sensed danger. She gathered her cubs close and watched Jack with alert eyes. Animals always knew when trouble was coming. It was humans who convinced themselves everything would be fine. Jack checked his rifle and loaded his pistol. Old habits died hard. But this wasn't Vietnam, and these weren't enemy soldiers. These were law enforcement officers doing their jobs. Killing them would solve nothing and destroy everything. But he wouldn't let them take his wolves without a fight. The convoy stopped at the base of the hill leading to Jack's cabin. Men climbed off their machines and began the steep climb on foot. Jack could see Derek Powell among them, pointing up toward the cabin and gesturing animatedly. 6 men total. 2 park rangers in official uniforms. 2 sheriff's deputies with weapons drawn. And 2 others in expensive winter gear who looked like lawyers or bureaucrats. They were still 100 yards away when Jack called out, "That's far enough. State your business." One of the rangers, a middle-aged man with gray in his beard, shouted back, "Mr. Morrison, I'm Ranger Dave Collins. We need to talk to you about a wildlife violation report. May we approach?" "Depends on what you want to talk about," Jack replied. "Sir, we have reports you may be harboring endangered wolves on your property. We need to investigate and remove any illegal animals for their own safety." Jack almost laughed at the irony. Remove them for their own safety. Like the villages they burned in Vietnam to save them from communism. "What if I told you there are no wolves here?" Jack called back. Derek Powell pushed forward, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air, "We know they're in there. I heard them myself." Ranger Collins held up his hand for silence. He was clearly the leader, a man who preferred talking to shooting. Jack respected that. But respect wouldn't save his wolves. "Mr. Morrison, we're not here to cause trouble. If you're caring for injured wildlife, we understand. But wolves are a protected species. They need specialized care and eventual release into appropriate territory. And if I refuse to let you search my property?" "Sir, we have a warrant. But we'd prefer your cooperation." Jack's mind raced through options. He could barricade the cabin and hold them off for hours. Maybe days. But eventually they would bring more men, more weapons. And the cubs would suffer in a siege. He could try to hide the wolves, but where? The cabin was small and these men would search everywhere. The she-wolf couldn't travel far on her injured leg, and the cubs were too young to survive outside. Or he could trust these men to do the right thing. Trust that sometimes the system worked, that good people in uniform could make good decisions. It was the hardest choice Jack had ever faced. Harder than any decision in Vietnam. Because this time, innocent lives hung in the balance. Lives he had sworn to protect. Behind him, one of the cubs whimpered softly. The sound cut through Jack's heart like shrapnel. These weren't just wolves anymore. They were his family. His responsibility. His chance at redemption. "I need 5 minutes," Jack called out. "We can give you that," Ranger Collins replied. "But then we're coming up, with or without your permission." Jack went back inside the cabin. The she-wolf looked up at him with trusting eyes. She had placed her faith in this broken old soldier, and now he might have to betray that trust. "I'm sorry, Mama," Jack whispered. "I don't know how to protect you from this." He knelt beside the wolf family and gently stroked each cub. They nuzzled against his hands, their small bodies warm and trusting. In their innocent eyes Jack saw everything good he had never been. Everything pure he had destroyed in Vietnam. But maybe this didn't have to end the same way. Maybe, for once, Jack Morrison could find a third option. A way to save what mattered most without destroying everything else. He stood up and made his decision. Not as a soldier following orders. Not as a killer choosing targets. But as a father protecting his children. Jack Morrison was about to fight his last battle. And this time, he was fighting for life. Jack opened his cabin door and stepped onto the porch. He left his rifle inside. This battle would be won with words, not weapons. "Ranger Collins," he called out. "I have something to tell you before you come up here." The men stopped climbing and waited. Jack could see their breath steaming in the cold air. Weapons ready but not raised. Professional lawmen, not trigger-happy amateurs. 40 years ago I came back from Vietnam, Jack began, his voice carrying clearly across the snow. I killed 243 enemy soldiers in that war. Maybe more. I came home with blood on my hands and death in my heart. The men shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't what they expected to hear. 3 weeks ago I found a she-wolf caught in an illegal trap. She was dying. Pregnant. I could have left her there. Could have walked away like I did so many times in the war. Jack paused, gathering his courage for what came next. But I didn't walk away. I saved her. I helped deliver her cubs. For the first time in 40 years, I brought life into this world instead of taking it away. "Mr. Morrison," Ranger Collins said gently. "That's a beautiful story. But the law is still the law." "I know," Jack replied. "That's why I'm going to make this easy for you." Jack walked to the edge of his porch where everyone could see him clearly. He pulled out his old service pistol and held it up in the air. "This is the weapon I carried in Vietnam. It's taken more lives than I can count. It's the symbol of everything dark and broken inside me." Without another word, Jack threw the pistol as hard as he could. It arced through the air and disappeared into a deep snowdrift 50 yards away. "I don't need it anymore," Jack said simply. "Because I'm not a killer anymore. I'm a protector. And I'm asking you to let me keep protecting this family." The silence stretched for long moments. Then Ranger Collins began climbing toward the cabin again. But his weapon was holstered now. "Let me see them," Collins said when he reached the porch. "Let me see these wolves you've been protecting." Jack opened his cabin door. The she-wolf lay peacefully near the fireplace, her 3 cubs nursing contentedly. When she saw the stranger, she tensed but didn't growl. She trusted Jack's judgment. Ranger Collins stood in the doorway for a full minute, watching the wolf family. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft with wonder. "Jesus, Morrison. They're beautiful. They're mine," Jack said quietly. "And I'm theirs. For the first time in my life, I belong somewhere. With someone." Collins looked at Jack with new understanding. "The mother's leg? Healing well. Give her another month and she'll be ready for anything. And you think you can raise wild wolves? I think I can protect them better than anyone else. This mountain is their territory now. I'm just the caretaker." Ranger Collins smiled slowly. It was the smile of a man who understood that sometimes the law had to bend for something more important than rules. "You know what, Morrison? I think you're right.